Hello and welcome to Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, May 30th, 2021. I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I am here with my dad, Dan, through Zoom. And today I am happy to say that we have a very special guest with us, Austin Kirkland. And hello, Austin. Thank you for being here. And he is going to be he is the future owner, I should say, of the LL Polk Birthplace in Polkton, one of Preserve Mecklenburg's projects that my dad has talked about before. And we're so happy to have him. And Dad, I will let you start with the interview. Take it away.
Well, I know you got a website you can share, Austin, and
You mean a PowerPoint presentation?
PowerPoint. Well, he's going to share a screen. Yeah, he's got a PowerPoint. That's going to be great. The first question I want to ask you, and we'll look at some pictures maybe later of the open. But let's just say that most people who would drive by that house would look at it and say, it's a wreck. It's impossible. The best thing to do would be to take it, just burn it down. I mean, if there's nothing worth saving, it's impossible. Now, what drew you to this house? Why have you decided that you would like to be the owner of the LL Polk house in Polkton?
Well, first, thank you all for having me on with all this. And I really think that it drew me to the house because of two different things. One was the architecture of the house. It's a style of a house. It's the hall and parlor that you don't really see too many of them left, especially from that era and the condition that that house is in. A lot of people drive by it, like you said, and they look at it and say, oh, that's just an old fallen in house. But when I walked over there and I got to see the structure, I got to see a house that was pretty much 80% original. All the way down to the siding of that house still looks original to me. And the architecture of it's a federal style architecture that really drew me to it, because it's not that big grand plantation house that you see here in the South that people think of from that era. It's the simple homestead farm house that you would have seen all across the entire state of North and South Carolina, all the way up and down really the eastern seaboard. And there's very few of those structures left. And it really drew me to it, just to a lot of its simplicity, but elegance in the same sense. The second thing that drew me to it is the history of the house. Leonidas Lafayette Polk, being born there, being such an influential man in North Carolina history and really national history, and to see the structure in the condition that it was in, and the opportunity to be able to preserve and save a structure with that historical significance, it really drew me to it. And it's an awesome opportunity to save a piece of history that we could very easily lose if we don't do something with it.
Well, you know, one of the things that just struck me so much about you as a young man is that you have a love for history. You have a real sensitivity to history. And where did that come from, Austin? Where did you get that?
Well, it really goes back to it was my 11th birthday, or actually it went before that. I was watching flipping through the channels. I was about 8 years old, and I used to love to watch History Channel. Well, I used to like it because it had like the soldiers and all the, the tanks and all the airplanes and everything else on it. And I was watching this one episode, and it was about it was about Fredericksburg, the Battle of Fredericksburg during the Civil War. And I started watching it, and they brought up a name on there. It was Richard Rowland Kirkland. And I realized that, wait a minute, I may have history in this that time period from my family. So the name struck me because that's my last name, Kirkland. So I started doing some research and started doing some studying, and he's not my ancestor, direct lineage, but I did find ancestors in the Civil War, and it kind of drew me to it. And then I started studying up on it and the local history. And then I went to one of my first reenactments when I was about 11 years old, and I got to see history come to life. And it really made it so much more condensed and localized for me at that point. So I started doing research on it, and then I really got heavy into the Revolutionary War and started studying, especially around the Charlotte region here. There's a ton of history from this region that a lot of people don't know about from the American Revolution. So I started doing studying on that and started going out and searching for places and finding these sites and stuff. I'd crawl through briars and brush through woods trying to get to where I'd look on old maps and I'd say, well, I'm pretty sure this is where this happened. And I'd wind my way back through the woods to find it, and got real involved with historical sites through doing that. And that kind of led me into much more of a study of the history locally, and it just became a passion of mine. And it's something I didn't study it through college. I didn't do like a history major or anything like that, but I look back, I wish I did, in a sense, because it would help me out in a way of studying it. But it was more just a personal attraction, especially to local history. It really drew me to it because there's so much here, and there's still so much to be found and so much to be discovered and learned in this history locally. And I really studied more on like a personal level of history. I really loved that part of it, because when I know a lot of people, they study history and they look at the generals or they look at the presidents or the large figures in history. I really got drawn to these personal figures in history, where it was the common man, the common farmer, the yeoman farmer, things like that, that really drew me to it, and I could relate with them a lot. And it kind of drug into my career life. That's where I kind of went to timber framing. It is a 8,000-year-old trade, and it kind of brings me back to my roots in a sense.
Well,
And
I'm going to interrupt you a minute, because I got a feel for that, and that's wonderful. I mean, I found myself that if you're interested in history and you do historical research, you never get bored. It's like a detective story. It's always there to be dealt with. Now, I want you to talk to me about timber framing. And I want to ask you, I believe I'm correct in saying this, Austin, that the vast majority of the homes that are built today are not timber frame construction. Why have things changed? What are the great qualities of timber frame construction? What is timber frame construction? Just talk to me about timber frame construction and how it's different from what most of us see going up today. Do you hear me?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, that I could go. There's a lot to talk about there. I put together a little PowerPoint to kind of show, that way I can kind of summarize it down into the different stages.
Great.
In there, I'll be able to talk about a little bit of hit pretty much all the points that you're talking about there. So I'm going to pull this up. Can y'all see that?
Yep, there you
Yeah.
go.
We sure can.
Nice.
Oh,
So this is kind of the intro to timber framing. So timber framing dates back about 8,000 years. There's been archaeological discoveries in the Mesopotamian area, all the way over into Asia Minor, places like that they have discovered timber frame construction. So what timber frame construction is basically where you take two pieces of heavy timber, meaning something that is like 4 inches by 4 inches or bigger, and you're joining them together and creating a skeleton that holds together with no metal, and it basically creates the bones to your structure. And then you enclose it by putting your sheathing onto the outside of that. So here in this picture, you can actually see this is what they actually would call a crook frame, which is an older style and design that has been modernized in a sense and turned into, this is a new structure that has been built, and it's basically like a little camp site that they turned this into. But that's the amazing thing about timber framing, is that you got all these different traditions, all these different countries coming together, and you're able to pull from all of them and create something that's absolutely beautiful. This was built by a friend of mine, Jack Sobon, out of Massachusetts. He is an amazing, he's actually an architect and a timber framer. He does both. An amazing, amazing gentleman.
You build timber frame buildings, don't you?
I do, yes, sir. Yes, that's basically my business. It's Spotted Dog Timber Frames. We do new construction all the way to historical restoration and preservation. So barns, homes, pavilions, basically garages, and then things like the Polk House.
Well, why should I bother having a timber frame building built rather than just doing a traditional balloon frame where you nail everything together? I mean, why would I want a timber frame building?
So a timber frame is going to be a lot stronger. Timber framing has proven itself. As you can see here in this photo, this structure here is somewhere around 600, 700 years old. I don't feel like I'd be wrong in saying that we're probably not going to have these stick-built structures that we have these neighborhoods built out of nowadays around Charlotte here in about 600-700 years. Either they're going to be bulldozed over, or they're going to fall over or rot down from some of the modern building construction that we have today. It just doesn't hold up.
Why do these timber frame buildings last so long?
Well, if you can see up here in this structure, you see all these braces. You have what right here is called a bent, and you have a beam that runs across, which is called a tie beam. And you have your two posts, and then you have these braces running in. So if you have an outside force pushing in from one direction on it, the structure is pushing back just as hard, if not harder, pushing back against that force. And it's all locked together. So every member of that frame is working with every other member of the frame. So it's all joined together. And when I'm building my structures today, I'm looking at that in the wood. So when I take a piece of wood, a timber, and I look for the heart in that timber. So just like a tree, how a tree grows and all the fibers work together in that tree to keep it together, whether it keeps it from twisting, it keeps it from falling over or bending or breaking or snapping. Same thing's going on in a timber frame. So when I get my timber from the sawmill, I'm looking and I find the heart in each piece of timber, and that heart faces to the centermost point of the frame. So if this frame right here, look at the dead center above that little desk or that little bench right there, and you'll see that's the dead center. That's where all the heart is going to face. So as this structure moves or breathes, it's going to move or breathe the same as a tree does growing in the forest.
Well, now let me give you a kind of a personal story here. And I want you to come back to timber framing for sure, but just to ask you a question. I own a condo that was built in the 1970s, and it's a typical stick frame or balloon frame building. Well, the building sits up on top of a cliff and it's settling. And one of the things that happens is eventually your front door won't open and close correctly. You have to take it off and shave it down so that the building is settling. Now, I know that's a foundation issue, but is there anything about timber framing that's going to be more resistant to settling than stick frame or balloon frame building?
Yes, kind of like with all the parts working together. So if you have one corner that's starting to settle, and you can actually see this on the Polk house itself, we actually have a foundation situation where the back corner is settling. It's actually about 4.5 inches lower than the front, and some of that has to do with the foundation actually falling out from underneath it. Um, but the frame is all still there and it's solid. And what that is doing is basically every piece is working together. So it's helping hold up that corner, all these other members to the frame. So like on a door on a timber frame house, that door is pretty much always going to open. On a stick built house, you don't have those other members working to help hold it together like a timber frame is. And when you think about the shrinkage of wood and the movement of wood, a 8x8 is not going to move as much as a 2x4. A 2x4 is going to move a lot more. I've actually seen 2x4 studs where they're so bow-legged that you can't actually use it. You have to just throw it out to the side. These timbers on a timber frame, I've never seen a timber go so crooked or so bowed that we can't use it. It's something that these members are still almost logs in themselves. They're not going to move as much as the smaller structures. The smaller 2x4s and 2x6s and stuff are going to move.
Now,
Now,
I have a question that I would like to ask. It's that, Austin, how is a timber frame different than like a log cabin? What I would traditionally think about as a log cabin. So I'm trying to understand like what's kind of the
So
difference.
I get that question a lot. So I'll be at a place and they'll say, "Oh, you're a timber framer. You must build log cabins." And well, I have worked on log cabins and I've built one log cabin. I'm not a log cabin guy. Timber frames are more or less in a sense for people today think of as post and beam. So you're going to have your post and then you're going to have beams that run in between your post holding it all together. And traditionally they're actually called braced structures. So that's where all the braces are in these buildings. And if you look at a building that's built today that somebody calls a timber frame, and actually I think I have it right here, you could see in this photo, it's going to have, there's no metal in this. There's no metal plates or anything. And this one, you see all the metal plates and all that holding it together. There's no bracing in there on that one with the metal plates. So that's a post and beam. So a timber frame is going to have braces and it's going to have a lot of smaller parts involved holding it together, but they're still, in a sense, larger timber pieces, bigger than your 2x4 pieces. Definitely. Like my braces, the smallest brace I use on any of my frames is a 3-inch by 5-inch. That's the smallest member I
what's the
use.
difference between a log house? What's the difference
So the log
between
house is going to
a
be
log
stacked.
house and a timber frame house?
So the log house is going to be stacked and you're going to have your logs sitting in there basically where they interlock on your corners. So traditionally it would have been a dovetail or a half dovetail notch that would have been locking your logs together and keeping them from being able to fall outward or inward. And a timber frame, you don't stack any logs on top of each other. They're all, you're going to have a seal plate that runs all the way around. And you're going to have your posts that come up, and each post is going to be connected to the other post by different members in there, such as these girts or tie beams, things like that. So that's the difference.
When the Polk house was built, and we have a deed that says that L.L. Polk's father acquired this land in 1833. So, I'm going to kind of say it was built in the 1830s. But of course, we can adjust to that. But why wouldn't they have built that as a stick frame house in the 1830s? Were they building stick frame houses in the 1830s?
Stick frame housing really didn't come around until about the 1870s, really after the Chicago fire in 1871, when stick frame construction became very popular because of two different things. One, you could have unskilled labor that could build it, which meant it was cheaper. And two, you didn't have to have as many people on the job either, because you were able to raise these walls and put it all together with less men. To build a house the size of the Polk house, you would have had about 40 to 50 people out there raising this structure. You would have needed all that to raise it up. A stick-built house that same size, you may need 10. So that's the difference where, and possibly even less. That's the difference between why that one's not built is mainly because of era, the time period. It wasn't very commonly known how to even build. They didn't have dimensional lumber really at that time to build with. Everything on the Polk house was hand hewn, so there was no sawmills around to make 2x4s or 2x6s. It was all cut from trees right on the property using a broad axe and a felling axe and an adze to basically create the square timbers that go together.
When did mass-produced nails start appearing? That is, you just turn them out by the thousands. When did that start?
You do see that right around the beginning of the 1800s, 1820s. You really start seeing it 1830s. The Polk house has mass-produced nails in it. They were most likely shipped up from Charleston or somewhere like that. But they would have come in barrels and they would have been a cut nail. Now, a lot of people think of a cut nail today as the masonry cut nail that you see a lot of masons use. The nails of that era that were cut nails actually came on a sheet, and it had one lip on one side, and they started cutting those out and they would alternate, and it created this really thin nail that had a head on it that was just a little flatter and a little broader than the rest of the nail. And you really started seeing that about 1820s, 1830s.
Why are people not building many timber frame houses today?
Well, there's a lot of it's just forgotten history. It's crazy. We've been building these structures for 8,000 years, and all of a sudden, the past 150 years, we pretty much lose the understanding of how these things go together. There's that, and then there's also the whole sense of a timber frame takes a little longer. It's something that it does cost a little bit more to do than conventional framing. But if you really look at it, especially with the price of lumber right now, I can just about build you a timber frame cheaper than I can build you a stick-built house with the market that's going on, which is absolutely crazy. But
Yeah.
You're also looking at the time it takes to cut all the joinery. So that's where the labor comes involved. Whereas with the stick-built house, it's not going to cost you as much labor because it's all done right there on site. It's going to be very quick. A timber frame, it takes me about a month to cut a 2-story 30 by 40 house. Let's just say that average size. It takes me about 2 months to cut that frame. I'm sorry, about a month to cut that frame. It takes me about a month and a half to get the timber from the sawmill. After I place the order for it, they got to cut all of it. They got to source all the timber, all that. All the frames that I build are sourced with local timber. So my sawyer is finding people that are clearing power lines, clearing out road crews that are taking timber off the side of roads that are going to cause problems, things like that. So it takes time, but you're using a natural, sustainable resource.
How much of your interest in becoming the owner of the Polk house is the fact that it's a timber frame house?
I find it amazing that really a lot of it's quite special because of that, because it's a structure that's been there for 200 years. And in that 200 years, that structure has stood the test of time. We don't have too many timber frame structures here in the Southeast anymore. A lot of them were torn down. A lot of them burnt. And it's something very special to be able to see this structure still standing, still solid as a rock. And it's something that I have the opportunity to go in there and restore, and to be able to show people that, hey, look, this structure has been here 200 years. I'm still using the same joinery, the same techniques that they did when they built that house to build houses nowadays. And it's something that I get to preserve, this piece of history in the trade that I'm in, that not many people get to see anymore.
What do you want to do with the Polk house? What's your vision?
Well,
what do you want to do?
Well, it's my wife and I, we're doing this together, and it's my vision with the house is to see it become a part of the community again. We would like to either do uh, have a farmer's market out there, have the ability to have programs out there, to be able to have like a tractor show or something like that, to be able to allow the community to use it, like the Polkton town hall. If they wanted to hold a town hall meeting there, we're more than happy to allow them to do that. We'd also like to, we understand that the house has to bring in some sort of revenue to be able to maintain the property and to maintain the house. So in that, we've talked about weddings and stuff there to have it where it could be a venue. Uh, there's so many opportunities with that house and with the history of it to be able to do that. But that's kind of our goal with it, that we would like to do, is to be able to see it preserved almost to like a museum quality, but to be able to use it and have modern events and built to allow people to be able to enjoy it just as much as us.
Man, Dana, do you have any questions? A lot of issues here. You have any questions?
You mean so far? Because I think, Austin, you still got more in your PowerPoint. Do you? Do you have more?
Oh, I could talk for hours on this stuff. So I'm just kind of trying to.
How are we doing time wise, man, Dana?
Oh, we're doing okay. It's about 25 minutes, so he's got
All right.
time. So.
Show us some more.
Well, if you see here in this, let me go back to that one. So if you see this one, this structure here was built in England about 600 years ago or so. You can see the style of it. There's a lot of little pieces, and a lot of that is a very European style timber frame. A lot of this, even the joinery in this structure I'm using today, a lot of these joints are time tested. So why not use something that's 600 years old and use the same joints that they did to put into my frames? I know for a fact it lasted 600 years here. Why shouldn't it last 600 years in my frame? Now all the joinery and all these timber frames, it's all quantifiable. Most of my timber frames, or actually all my timber frames, are engineered. So they all have, all the joinery has been done by engineering, has been mathematically tested, the wood species I use, things like that. Now, these people didn't have that back in those days. They just knew, hey, this works. Over 8,000 years, they were able to discover that. And then after that, they started saying, hey, I don't know if that timber is going to span that distance and hold, so let's just beef it up. So they were using sometimes larger timbers, and a lot of times you see on those frames, you got the big timbers down low, smaller timbers up top, basically a triangle when you're building it. You want something very light up high. And also just to get it up there, you can't take a 3,000-pound timber and stick it 40 foot up in the air very easy 300 years ago.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is what kind of wood did they use to make the Polk house? What kind of wood is the frame?
The Polk house is southern heart pine, longleaf heart pine, and it also is white oak. A lot of the seal plates that I have discovered are white oak. The floor joists are white oak. Once you leave the floor system, I found where the post and a lot of the beams up higher are pine, and the rafters are all pine up top. And actually the rafters are round. They didn't hew them out or make them square or anything. They're still round up there.
And what wood are you planning to use when you restore it? Same?
I plan on using the same timber species, southern yellow heart pine, longleaf heart pine, and also white oak. White oak, what's interesting is that they knew back then what species to use where. The seal plates are made out of white oak. White oak is a very decay resistant, rot resistant material. That they knew that. That's why they used it there. The floor system is white oak. They knew that. They knew that they were in a humid climate down here in the southeast. So they were using these materials in the right places for the right reasons, which is absolutely amazing to me. A lot of people don't think about that stuff today. But they had these resources here locally that they knew how to use, so they used it, which is very special. Now, it also has to go with geographic location. When you start looking at these timber frames in other locations, you're going to find that they are built out of different species. You have up in the mountains, you're probably going to have a lot of them built out of chestnut or white pine. They had a lot more different species up there to use. You can just about find white oak in every single timber frame I've ever torn apart or looked at. But it's also interesting that when you start looking at the different styles and different cultures, the Polk house was built in an area that was settled by Germans. That's something that I discovered in this house, is that there is a German influence in the style of the framing that you see in this house. When you go over more towards the Waxhaw, the south side of Monroe, you see more of a Scots-Irish settlement. You don't see as many timber frames over there you see more log cabins in that region. Now, the timber frames I have found over there, those are more of an English design. They do not have as much of a German influence on them. So it's very much so a cultural characteristics of the frames. And that's something that they brought over from their countries. And when you start getting into more the mid 1800s, you start seeing all these cultures collide and clash together, creating these beautiful, amazing structures that have definitely, you can find German influence on one, and then you can find in that same frame French influence or English influence. It's absolutely amazing to me. And like in the Concord area, that area was settled by the Dutch, and you see that there are more characteristics towards the Dutch designs up there in that region. And that's one of the amazing things, like we were talking about earlier with history, is that you're a detective almost when you start studying history. You start figuring out, hey, this document says this area was like this. That means that what was that culture doing? Why are their structures built in that style? And you start finding, well, that's a cultural influence from that region. Kind of like around here.
Let me interrupt you for a minute, because I think this is an interesting story. I told you, there's a big white oak tree just right next to the Polk house. And how old do you think that white oak tree is?
Well, I would dare to say that it is any less than 200 years old. I believe that white oak tree was there when that house was built. But I could be wrong. It could be right around the Civil War, but somewhere between the Civil War and 1860s, 1830s was when that tree started growing. White oaks grow very slow. And especially a tree like that one, the way that it is, that's a very slow growing tree. And
when I told you that we got some big limbs over the top of that house. By the way, do you have any pictures of the Polk house immediately available, or do you not in your PowerPoint?
I do not currently, not on my computer. No, sir.
Well, I've got some, but that's okay. But one of the things that I told you was that we were going to have to trim up that tree, because we're afraid those big limbs that hang over that house are going to break off and go down and smash the house. And you expressed some interest in getting some of the wood from that white oak tree. And we start sawing off limbs or whatever. Why were you interested in the wood?
Well, it's a local material. It's about as local as you can get for the house.
That's true.
It's also wood that was used on the house, white oak, and it's a very strong, very durable wood. Like I was saying earlier.
How are you going to use that white oak you get from that tree?
Well, my plan is to use it for shingles. I'm going to hand split shingles to go back on the roof of that house. When I was in the attic, I discovered that there's a ton of nail holes all through the rafter boards that go from rafter to rafter, and which indicate to me that it was a wood shingled roof. Now, when I started looking at those shingle nails holes, I started seeing where there was oxidation from when the nails and the shingles were there. And to me, that showed me that it was white oak, which was a common wood that was used locally. There was white oak and southern yellow pine that were used locally for shingles. White oak lasts longer. That's another good reason to use it. But I do believe that that was the wood that was used on the top of that house for shingles. And so that's what I'm going to use it for, is the wood off of that tree to create shingles out of.
What kind of roof does it have right now?
Currently, it has a tin roof, in which the tin roof actually has a damaged spot on the front right side. It also it's a standing seam, so it is earlier, but it's not as early as when the house was built. I believe the tin roof was added sometime in the 1880s, 1890s. Because it is an early tin roof, but it's not as old as the house. It could have even been added in about 1900, 19 teens, just from the style of it. But I do not think it's much, if any at all, earlier than about the 1890s. When the town started growing, I think that really kind of gave the opportunity for that house, whoever lived in it at that time around 1900, they took and put a tin roof on it.
So you want to take
Austin-
it back to its original
Yeah,
condition?
Correct. I'd like to take it back to when it was built in 1830s. I want it to look basically when somebody drives by, they see a 1830s Federalist style house. And you don't see that very much around here nowadays. A house that is taken back to that extent of basically that era, that specific time period.
Austin, let's assume that somebody who's watching this podcast really is intrigued by the advantages of timber framing, and they would like to contact you and talk to you. What is your telephone number?
Well, maybe at least his email address. I don't know if he wants to
Email
give out
address.
his telephone number.
No, it's all good. My
Give us your
my
email address.
telephone. Well, I can give you both actually. My telephone is 704-288-8485, and my email
Say it
address
again,
is,
that's your business phone, isn't it?
that is, yes, sir.
Yeah,
It is
give your business phone again.
704-288-8485.
And what is
And
your email address?
it is my company's name, Spotted Dog Timber Frames. Actually, you can see it right there.
Oh, on your
And
hat.
then, yeah, you can see it right here too.
Oh,
And then,
SPOTDEDDOGFRAMES
no,
at
you left out the
gmail.com.
you left out the timber, didn't you? But anyway.
Timber,
yeah,
timber frames, Spotted Dog Timber
Timber
Frames
at
at
gmail.com.
gmail.com. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now, if you will, how are we doing time wise, Mary Diana?
Oh, well, we're getting towards the end of time. It's about, you've been talking about 36 minutes. But
Well, show us. Well, let me ask you a couple.
when does this work supposed to start? When's the work supposed to start, and when do you think it will be finished on the Polk
So
house?
the work on the Polk house, I'm planning on it to start basically shortly after we retain ownership of the property. So within the first week or two, I plan on getting out there and starting the cleaning up, at least of the process of cleaning up stuff, getting it figured out where things are going to have to move, getting things moved out of the way to get underneath the house, because there is foundation issues. That's one of my first things I got to work on, is the foundation on the rear left side of the house. It's got to be jacked
me
up.
how you did. How what somebody did was they just saw through the timber there, didn't they? They didn't know what they were doing, did they?
They
They had
did
no
not.
idea what they were doing. How do you fix something like that briefly? How do you fix it?
Well, basically, you take another timber that is the same dimensional size, and you're going to splice it into that timber. So the part that's missing, you need to replace that part, but also connect it to the other timbers to create one solid piece again. So basically, I got to do joinery on it and put a scarf joint in on each end of it and pull it back together and basically lock it in place. So that way it's one solid timber again.
I tell you, Austin, when Preserve Mecklenburg decided to get, people have been talking about wanting to save this house for 50 years. And when we got involved with it, we all thought what is going to be our chance of finding someone who will see the potential in this house? And, I said, we just don't know. And we decided that Preserve Mecklenburg, which is a regional Preservation Agency, which includes Anson County within its purview, we decided we just got to get the word out. We just got to let people know. And that's, of course, when we approached the local newspapers and we began spreading the word, making contacts. And I can tell you, I remember the day that you called me up and introduced yourself. And my first reaction was, well, here's another person that doesn't know anything. I mean, they don't know what they're getting into. They have no idea, you know, And to have you come on the scene, I cannot tell you what a wonderful thing it is, because you're a young man, you got time, you've got the passion, you've got the skill. And I know over the long term, this is going to be a wonderful project. And I think the fact that you've got this community outreach view, that you want to share it with the people, that you're aware of the fact that South Piedmont Community College is 5 minutes away on the LL Polk campus, just adds that much more potential. And I think it's just so incredibly exciting that you're doing this. And probably I'm going to want to do another podcast with you at some point where we really focus on that house and have plenty of pictures and go through it and look at it and just have you
what's
comment
going on with
all
the
the
house,
stuff, all the stuff that's going on. But Mary Dana, isn't it just incredible?
I am so excited, Austin. I rode down with my dad and saw the house. And, you know, I was sort of a person who was like, what is so special about this house? And I did not realize until hearing you today how it really is special. And I think it'll be great. And I can hear the love in your voice for the project. And I just am really thrilled to see what happens with it. So I can't wait to hear an update.
It's definitely an exciting project, and it's something that is it's a noble cause. It's something
Absolutely.
that I don't want to take up too much more time, but I grew up over in Waxhaw, and that area over there, especially down towards Lancaster, there's tons of historical structures that used to be there. And in my lifetime, I went in multiple of them, and I would go in there and look at them and be like, oh, wow, this structure, it really needs to be restored and saved, you know? And then the next thing I know, I drive by there and there's a neighborhood sitting where that house was.
Yeah.
And it really caught my attention with this house as to, hey, this is a historical and cultural landmark that here for Anson County. And everything's moving this direction. And if we don't save these structures before they're gone, who is? And this is just one opportunity that I hope in my lifetime that I get to put my hands to work to save one of these structures. And I'm hoping that in my lifetime I'll get the opportunity to save multiple of them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
There's tons of them left around here locally that still need our help, and this is just one dot on the map to what we can do.
Well, it's a labor of love, so you know, so I think that's wonderful. And I wanted to tell you that when you were talking about that you were really interested in the Revolutionary War, and I wanted to mention, did you know my dad wrote a book on the Southern campaigns of the American Revolution?
I did. Actually, I've read his book already.
I was going to say, there it is. See, I looked it up for you on there. So you've read his book. Okay, great. So I was going to say, yep, you could know a lot of the local sites by reading his book. So that's a great book in case anybody else wants to read it too. So, okay, well, we're going to wrap it up today. I'm sorry we're out of time. It's been really fun. And thanks for being with us, Austin. Dad, of course, always great.
We'll do another one on the house itself with a lot of pictures of the house. Let's do that at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Thank you, Austin.